We're going to talk about permaculture today and how to think better, improve our perspective about gardens. I am Liz. You are welcome to leave a little bit about yourself in the comments. So what is an ideal garden? I have a picture here of kind of what most people think is an ideal garden. You have some nice patio space, a lawn, a lot of surrounding flowers. So some buzzwords I hear a lot about what people want in a garden: low maintenance. They don't want to spend a lot of time working on it. They want it beautiful. They want it functional. It has to work well. What I don't see a lot of is people worrying about it being productive or sustainable. So they want not a lot of work, still look good. To kind of start thinking a little bit differently, the first thing I want to talk about is inputs and outputs. This is analyzing our garden, about what we're putting into our garden and what are we getting out of it. And often we kind of do this, like if I put in a lawn, well, I'm going to have to mow it, it's going to cost X amount of dollars. But we don't often look like, oh, but I have to use culinary water to irrigate it, and there might be some runoff of fertilizer that's going to affect the watershed downstream. We don't often think about that. So we need to also look at our environmental impact and also the intangible benefits. So putting in a pretty flower garden might not be productive and it might use up resources, but it also will give us those intangible benefits of beauty and relaxation and somewhere to go and relax. So to go through this, we're going to talk about different types of garden and what are the inputs and the outputs for each garden space. So starting off with bare ground, you think, well, this is kind of a zero input, zero output kind of thing. But in reality, to get bare ground, you have to work a little bit. On the picture on the left, I have bark mulch. So someone's put down that bark mulch. And they're also doing some method probably to control the weeds. Otherwise, you usually see a lot of weeds popping up in about any situation. On the right, this might be some road base. It's very compacted soils. You can see the cars, people are driving over it, and that's keeping the weeds down. So there's still inputs and outputs going on. Weeds, again, sometimes you think of a zero input, zero output situation. And again, you're not really putting anything into a weedy space. But if you look at it, you might be getting things out of it. There might be edible weeds. There's places for bees and other bugs and birds to get food and shelter. And then you're also, because you're growing things, you're adding to your soil health, which is great. So even though things might see zero input, zero output, there's a lot more going on if you really take the time to think about it. We have a traditional landscape, and here, what are you getting out of it? I don't know. It looks nice. The neighbors might think it's nice. Is it terribly functional? Not always. And is it a lot of work and a lot of input? Yes. So this has culinary water to make the grass green. You have to do a lot of hedging to keep the hedges as they look. And then also, if you look at here, you have to weed whack under the picket fence. You're going to have to trim the lawn. So there's a lot of inputs going into this to try to make it look nice. And the outputs is basically all you're getting is a nice place to look at. Though I don't like this. This was my yard when we moved into our house, and it doesn't look a thing like this anymore. So a permaculture landscape, this is my back garden. What am I putting into it? Again, I've got chickens, so I'm feeding and taking care of my chickens, watering my chickens. I'm irrigating this piece of ground, and also about $20 worth of seeds and some labor. So the inputs are relatively low. This is all irrigated off a secondary irrigation system too, so I'm not putting that culinary water into. And what am I getting out of it? Well, I'm getting eggs from my chickens. I'm also getting compost from my chicken that goes into the garden. The garden's giving me tomatoes and peppers and sunflowers and squash. And again, it's also a place that I enjoy and I like to be. So you also have xeriscapes, places they're not producing edible plants, but it is producing a very lovely place to be. And your inputs, your water is reduced substantially. As long as you organize it right, it's not going to be too much labor, especially if you use the right plants and they fill in the space. This is at the Denver Botanical Garden, so it's a really lovely place. And you really get a lovely place. And this is also a place that you can start collecting plants, and it provides a native habitat for insects and birds again. And so, it's quite a nice garden. So what should our gardens look like after kind of going through this process? We think about what we had before with, lawn and pretty shrubs, and we don't necessarily have to completely abandon it, but let's start opening our minds to other ideals and other things we want our garden to look like. This is at a garden in Ogden, right against the foothills, and the garden kind of seamlessly blends from a more traditional garden into kind of a wildscape, and it's really quite lovely. Another thing that I think we should be asking ourselves when we think about what we want out of a garden is, are we comfortable with losing our ability to produce our own food and basic needs? And so many people now don't know how to grow food. And food is one of the number one necessities we need to live. And I don't think we should be willing to give up our ability to produce our own food. When we produce our own food, we know where it comes from. We know what's going on. And, it's not we usually aren't able to produce everything we eat, but even a little bit of food that we are producing on our own is going to enrich our lives and improve our lives. New ideas that I think we should start thinking about is sustainability. Sustainability is kind of a buzzword now, but sustainability really means that I can do this indefinitely. I'm not using up resources that are going to run out. I'm not putting culinary water on a system that once my community grows, there won't be as much and won't be available. And I am using things like I'm reusing my own seeds. I'm planting perennial plants that'll last for a long time. So this garden can continue on indefinitely. My grandkids can still be in the same spot gardening in the same way. It has to be abundant. By abundance, I mean we're getting those outputs out of our garden, and it might not always be productive food, but it might just be a lovely place that we enjoy going to. And it also has to have a positive impact. So positive impact, I mean environmentally, our gardens should contribute to the health of the environment, not take away from it. So we're not putting on lots of chemical fertilizers that are washing out and affecting our watershed. We're not putting culinary water on things that don't provide any impact. So we're reducing our water supply for basically no reason. We're not putting a lot of pollution and chemicals and time in something that doesn't really have an output for us. We really are using our gardens to create habitat for wildlife. We're using our gardens to create a part where we can be abundant and we can live the life that we want to live. So what's getting in our way of changing our gardens to kind of meet this new ideal? One of the things I see is it's a really high learning curve. What steps do you take if you want kind of this new ideal garden? Well, you could go to a nursery and you could pick out some plants. If no one's there and you don't know a lot, you're not often going to get the right kind of plants you want. If you don't know what you're doing, you might have weeds take over and your plants die, and it's just a failure. So you really have to learn what to do and how to do it to be successful. Another thing is just a fear of weeds. And I'm not saying weeds taking over. I'm saying people are often so afraid of weeds that they don't start transitioning over to these more abundant and diverse gardens. They stick with the lawn where they know how to take care of the weeds. They stick with the very barren kind of xeriscapes, where there's nothing going on, because at least then you can control the weeds. This is a place in my garden, and there are weeds. There are plenty of weeds. But there's also plants, and there's also fun going on. So this is a place my kids play. There's asparagus in the background. There's a magnolia tree. There's good plants growing on, and yes, there's weeds, but there's a lot of good going on too. And I'm not too concerned about the weeds. Other obstacle is our perception and past failure. I'll talk about it more, but having a lawn we know what's going to happen. It's kind of predictable. We've seen it happen But these other gardens that we can put in, we don't know quite how it's going to work. This is my garden about a year and a half into it, and there are some things wrong. I need to still install a path correctly. I've got some plants that are taking over. I've got weeds. And I know a lot of people will get to this kind of spot and just give up. You've got a lot of weeds kind of coming in. You've got more work you do, and so you just give up and you rip it out and you put in lawn because you know what's going to happen. Whereas here, if you keep going, well, some of those perennial plants, once you kind of edit out the ones that are being weedy, all those perennial plants are starting to take over and grow and become more abundant and more lovely, and it's becoming less maintenance over time. So there's kind of this hiccup spot where it's a little bit hard, but if we keep going, it won't be that bad.
Mom, this joking.
All right, one thing we can do is really learn from lawn. So lawn has become the default choice for our landscapes. And I want to ask the question of why. Why do we always put in lawn? And I think that the lawn care industry has used techniques to make it very easy and make it a standard to put in lawn. And I'm going to talk about some of these. First, it's a streamlined process. So how do you go about putting in lawn? Well, you can order sod. You can have someone come in and put your irrigation system in and grade it and put your lawn down and water it, and you're good to go. It's not an easy process, but it's sure been streamlined, and there's a lot of people that will take care of your lawn for you or put in your lawn for you. So it's not going to the garden and looking around and not knowing what to do and often ending up with plants that don't belong and failure. It's become very easy to put in the lawn. It's also very easy to maintain. Lawn isn't low maintenance. It used to be lawns were in estates. They were for wealthy individuals because they were very high maintenance. But over time, we've created things like lawnmowers, and there's lawn care companies out there, and we've made it very easy to take care of a lawn. It used to be lawns, you had to have sheep to mow your lawn, basically. It's the only way you had a lawn is sheep. But now we've created these huge lawnmowers that can mow very quickly and very rapidly. And so lawn care now has really gone down. And we don't have to, there's no reason we can't kind of apply these same kind of principles of maintenance to other kinds of plants. Last is recognized as beautiful. Green lawn is seen as desirable and beautiful regardless of other considerations. So yeah, we might be pouring chemicals and culinary water on our lawn, but everyone thinks it looks nice. So we're not caring about what's going into this lawn. We just look at it and we think it looks nice and green. We've kind of been trained to accept that as a very desirable trait. We can use kind of what we've learned from the lawn care industry to kind of apply that now to regular gardens and improve how we approach kind of a new ideal garden and make it more approachable for more people. First, we really need this increased ease. So lawn, you can see it's not really an easy process, but somehow the industry's made it seem easy. You have 4-step programs of fertilizer, so you know how to fertilize your lawn, even though you don't necessarily need that. And when you learn more about lawn, you realize how much it's been simplified. The process has been totally simplified by the whole industry. But I think we kind of need that in other areas of a little bit of a simplification so that you can enter and it doesn't seem so daunting to start putting in a food forest and start daunting to grow your own food. And it's easy, and you can easily see, oh, if I do this, 6 months later I'm going to get tomatoes, and it's not that hard. We also need more examples. Examples can be anything: public gardens, residential gardens, and published works in books and articles. And when we start to see these gardens and all this is possible, it is plausible to have a landscape that isn't all grass and a few shrubs. You can have no grass and you can still have a lovely landscape that isn't going to be overrun for weeds. And the more you see these, I think the more you realize that you can do this in your own yard. I have been to communities that host garden tours, and just by hosting a garden tour, people will go home and they start to copy what they see, and you have more and more of these different gardens out there, not more of the same of lawn and a few shade trees. We also need education. I always like to think people talk about how they have a green thumb or a black thumb and just anything I touch dies, or oh, you just can grow everything. It's not a matter of talent. Gardening is nothing about talent. It's all dependent on knowledge. And if you can grow plants and grow them well, it's usually because you know more. So we do need education for people, and education that isn't overly daunting, that people can approach and learn from very easily. What can we do in our own garden? I kind of talked about ways that I want to see the industry kind of change, but what can we do in our own spaces to start changing over to these more abundant type gardens? One thing is just to plant. So start with what little knowledge you have and plant what you can. You won't ever know everything. I've been studying gardening for over 10 years now, and I still don't know everything. I still often feel like a beginner. So if I don't know everything and I've been studying it for 10 years, you can't wait until you feel like you know everything before you start. Gardening is about learning and growing and starting somewhere. Start somewhere, just plant, see what happens, and then you can go from there. This is another big one. I've talked about weeds a lot already because there's such a big impact to our gardens, and how we interact with our gardens is how we view and treat weeds. And I entitle this selective weeding because we have to learn how to weed properly so it's not overwhelming. Trying to get rid of every single weed often results in failure, and we give up. But we can learn how to recognize what weeds are bad, how they're coming in, what can we do to minimize them. So we're never going to eradicate weeds from our gardens, but we're going to lessen the impact that they have on our garden. Some ways we can do this is really mulching is wonderful. And mulch can be anything from organic mulches, gravel mulches. I used to use more of the plastic and weed fabric, but I hardly ever use that anymore. I like to do more organic mulches. And this doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be a $4 bale of straw that we buy. It can be leftover chicken bedding is something I use very frequently, and I get fertilizer with it. So mulch can be whatever we have on hand, but we're using it to reduce the weeds, and it has to be deep to reduce the weeds. We need to at least be 2 inches, and sometimes 4 to 6 inches is much better. Not every weed is bad. Some weeds really don't have that much of an impact. There's a whole group of weeds called winter annuals, and they germinate in the fall, and they grow over winter. They kind of just stay under the snow, and in the spring they'll grow up, they'll sprout, they'll silt seed, and they'll die by the end of May. They're gone by the summer. So those weeds, they look bad in the spring, but they're gone, and I know they're going to be gone soon. So I might go through and weed them, but I might not. If I have to, decide where my time goes, that might not be a big deal to me to really control those weeds. There are other weeds that are noxious and annoying, and they're going to take over very rapidly if we don't control them. And those are the weeds that we're going to start focusing our efforts on. So there's lots of weeds, and we do need to weed, but sometimes we don't need to weed everything. We need to weed early and hard. Weeding means that we'll have more weeds. If you start to wait, and then perennial weeds will spread, and annual weeds will set seed and start reseeding, and it'll get worse. And you're going to have a lot more weeding to do. So even, February, March, when it's just barely warming up, that's the time to be going out there and starting to get rid of some weeds that we're having problems with. And not waiting until July, August, when they're very, very established and it's hot and we don't want to be out there anyway. Also, we should always have something else. So if I have an area of ground and I'm trying to get rid of weeds, I always have to think, what's going to be there when this weed is gone? And if I have, another plant that's growing, a vegetable or strawberries or something, and I know that's going to fill in, so I'm getting rid of the weeds so that can fill in easier. Now, if I'm just getting rid of a weed because it's there, I'm going to have more weeds come back. So we always want something else there. And if we don't know what it wants, we can at least do mulch. So we're putting down mulch so we're not getting weeds as much. But there's something. If we have bare ground, there's going to be weeds. Also, we need to start small and observe. We always should be evaluating our efforts and finding out what works and what doesn't work and why. This is a clover patch in my backyard, and it worked really great. And I love it, and it's super simple, but also I've learned a lot, like, well, yeah, but it's great, but I still need to mow it occasionally to get it looking nice. I still have to weed it occasionally. So, and I kind of learned how to put it in so I could replicate it if I wanted to more clover other places. So, and with the clover patch, I started a very small patch, and it's gradually grown out into different parts of my yard. When I'm like, oh, okay, I did this one spot and it worked well, and now I can go use it in another spot. So we just start small, find out what works and what doesn't work and why. So there are times when plants die. We try to plant something and it doesn't work. And instead of trying to go back and redo the same thing, we find something else to try. We do something else a little bit differently, and then it's going to work, and then it's going to be okay. Okay, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed that.